Welcome to Voodoo Whiskey Gaming, and this is my late review of Marth is Dead. I played on the Xbox Series X. It's also available on the Series S, Xbox One, PS4, PS5, and PC. I will say on the PlayStation, you can only get the censored version, so be aware of that. One thing I do want to say before I get into it is this is easily the most mature game that I've ever played in content. It addresses a lot of just really dark and mature themes that are out there in the world, and they are horrific. And this game goes fully into it, as well as it delves into mental health in a lot of ways. So anyone who chooses to play this game, be forewarned. I just feel I should put that out there. Okay, so we're going to start with the story. You play as Julia, who is the daughter of a German Nazi general and an Italian woman during World War II. And basically when the game kicks off, you find your twin sister murdered in the lake, and the rest of the game gets really into investigating that and starts digging up a lot of Julia's past. And like I said, it gets into some really dark places, but I gotta say, what they did with the story, I actually enjoyed, and they took some elements that, if done wrong, can be really horrible and just destroy a story, but I gotta say, they did them well, they did them right, and it actually worked in this game. No matter how really dark and twisted this game does get, I did actually think the story went some weird and interesting and places that leave you with that 1,000-mile stare, but I think overall it was a well done and well told story. And I can't really talk much more about it without getting into spoiler territory and, getting into some deeper, darker topics, so we're just gonna move on. And we're going to move on to the audio, and the first thing I'm going to say is I think the music is well done in the game. I think it works very well with what's going on. So there's that, as well as I think the sound effects, for the most part, are well done. There were times where I felt that there were definitely sound effects missing, but I think, they did well enough. When I started the game, it was all in Italian. I decided to switch over my audio to English, and oh god, it was so fucking bad. It's not even funny. The English voice acting is terrible. I recommend playing this game in Italian if you play it. It does have subtitles, don't worry, although there was a glitch with those where the subtitles didn't always stay on as long as I needed them to, but it was only in one scene, and it was maybe 5 lines in total. Now let's move on to the gameplay mechanics and whatnot, and when I went into this, I was aware that it was meant to be a horror game, but man, it is not a traditional horror game. It is very much a psychological horror game, and not even in the traditional sense there. But it is a first-person game where you basically live this girl's life for several days. They do go a little too nuts with the mechanics. You do a lot of things in this. There's even a point where you have to do Morse code, and you actually have to do the ... dashes, and then you have to translate the responses. They go a little too deep with every action that you take, and they're all done with little, not quite mini games, I don't want to say, but it is controller interactions, kind of like you would have almost a QTE-ish event. But it's a bit much. They could have toned some of that back. It gets a bit time consuming and overly complicated at times getting through some of those mechanics. But also, your character is big into photography, and they do a lot of mechanics there, too. Again, to the point where, you're getting into some of the fine minutia, and there's literally a tutorial where they're basically we know that this is getting a bit deep. We could have gone deeper and wanted to. They don't quite say that, but they basically say that, and it does get to the point where you're holy crap, guys, really could have toned this back a bit. But the story really does pull it through, and you're sitting there going, yeah, this is kind of obnoxious, but I'm really curious where this is going. So let's get into the controls, and honestly, overall, I think the controls work well. I do think riding the bicycle and piloting the boat, yeah, a bit shit. They could have done better with that, but overall, your movement, the responsiveness of the controllers, the responsiveness and movement of the camera, they're all very well done, and I don't have any complaints with that. Then lastly, the graphics and visuals. It's kind of an inconsistent game. There are certain things that look really amazing, and there's a lot of detail in certain things, but then there are other things where there's not as much detail and it looks a little shitty. But overall, I gotta say, I was actually really impressed. They were going for a more realistic appearance, and they, for the most part, nailed it. I will say the best looking moments are the opening cutscene and the ending cutscene, but overall, I think they did a good job building the world that you live in. There's all these little details in the villa that you're staying at that help it feel very much alive. Even though you generally tend to be alone on the map, they do things that make you feel like, oh, somebody was here and now they're not. They've, gone off to town or whatever. They do a good job with that. But this game, like I said earlier, also gets into some dark and disturbing imagery, and it's not like what you expect. Like, when you start off, this game definitely goes to a spooky place, but man, it goes to a very different place, and you can see some very deranged stuff. Which obviously I'm not going to get into because, again, it's there in the game and quite frankly, it can almost needs to be experienced. But if you do the censored version or uncensored version, you can skip some of those scenes, I should say. But in those scenes, they do a good job making it visceral, making it right there and real feeling. But moving away from that, they do some good subtle details with it being first person. You actually have a body and you can see your body, you can see your shadow and it matches your body. Things like that I think are well done, and there's a lot of AAA games out there that don't even do that as well as this game, so I think it's impressive that they went there. As much as I whined about some of the mechanics going a little too far, I do think they did a good job visually representing those mechanics and walking you through them, and they just did good overall with the graphics and visuals. It's not a AAA game, it's not the best looking thing you're gonna see, but it does look good enough to get you through the story. The weakest element visually though is animation. There are definitely animations that could have been better and they just don't look quite right. So I do have that complaint when I'm talking about the graphics and visuals. But before the wrap up, I do want to say I did run into a few weird glitches. There was one time where I was riding around on my bike and I couldn't get off my bike. I had to reload. Fortunately, the autosaves are pretty often, so it wasn't a huge issue. I didn't lose much. But then a much bigger glitch also occurred where I fell through the fucking world, man. So that was very frustrating, but once again, the autosaves are frequent enough that it wasn't a huge issue. It was still very frustrating though. Let's get into the wrap-up, and the first thing I'm going to say is, man, when I finished this game, which was not that long ago, it definitely left me in a weird headspace, and just sitting there going, what the fuck did I just experience? But not in a necessarily bad way. And I'm going to say it right now, I don't know that I can recommend this game. You have to be in the right headspace for this game, and that's something I can't sit there and say yes or no to. I can't say I recommend this or don't recommend this. You have to choose for yourself because you really do have to be in the right headspace. And you have to be in a mentally healthy headspace. I'm gonna say that right now because like I said, this left me just kind of sitting there going, wow, what the fuck did I just sit through? But I will say, if you feel that you are capable of sitting through this and playing this game, I would recommend it. It's a really good story, it's a really interesting story, and it definitely shines light on some very important topics that I think, while society is getting better about, we still need to get better about, and I'm going to include some links down below for help on psychological things if you need them. I think it's important. But that being said, can't recommend or not recommend. It's a 100% up to you. I am not sad in the slightest that I played this game. I actually really think it's a great game in its own rights, despite its issues. Okay, so in the comments down below, God, I don't even know where to go with this one. I'm just gonna leave it. If you have played Marth is Dead, why don't you chime in on that, what your thoughts were. And as always, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please hit that like button. And if you like what I'm doing in general, share and subscribe. Have a good one.